When I divorced 5 years ago, I was a mess. The direct cause was my ex-husband's affair. But it wasn't just that. He was a typical emotional abuser. There were signs of it even before we got married. For instance, he was saying, "You should only believe what I say." I interpreted it favorably during our dating period as leadership and decisiveness, even though it was just emotional abuse. He was also careless with money, sometimes saying, sorry, I'm broke, and I'd end up paying for his meals. "Forgot my wallet, so you pay," he would say, making me pay for his shopping frequently. Still, I was thrilled when he said, "Thanks. I'm really lucky to be with a great woman like you," despite he was just flattering me. In hindsight, his great woman meant a convenient woman who would do anything he said. Love is blind, as they say. I didn't realize it, though my family probably noticed something off about him. My family was strongly against our marriage. But I pushed through and married him anyway. Even after realizing my mistake shortly after the wedding, I found it hard to say I wanted a divorce. After marriage, we couldn't afford to live by ourselves, so we lived with his parents, who were just like him. Irresponsible with money and selfish. His mother, my mother-in-law, said, "One person is enough for household chores. I did it all before, so now it's your turn," pushing all the housework onto me. His father was even more unreasonable. Looking at the dinner I had prepared, he would suddenly say, "Hey. I wanted barbecue for dinner," even though he had never mentioned it. In fact, he had requested fish, so I prepared it accordingly. "Be quiet." I changed my mind. "As a wife, you should pick up on that," he would retort, leaving the dinner I made and taking my mother-in-law and husband out to eat. If I listed every incident, there would be no end, but the terrifying thing about emotional abuse is that it takes time for the victim to realize they are being abused. By the time you realize it, you may be in a very bad mental state. Had it not been for my husband's affair, I might still be trapped in that house. Just before the divorce, I had become like a puppet, silently complying with every unreasonable demand. His affair was discovered through his easy mistake, leaving a hotel loyalty card in his pocket. When I confronted him, he shifted the blame to me, saying, "It's not a big deal to cheat. It's your fault for not dressing up or being fashionable." My in-laws joined in, saying, "That's right. It's your fault for not being attractive. You should be ashamed for blaming our son when you're the one who got cheated on," they scolded me. That was the last straw. I reached out to my parents, crying, "I need help. I want a divorce," and they immediately came to get me. Shocked at my emaciated, changed appearance, they fiercely confronted my in-laws and husband. "You've worked our precious daughter to the bone. What do you think she is to you? We're taking Alice back. After what she's been through, we have every right to take this further." My mother's angry words made my father-in-law panic and say, "Please, no lawsuit. That sounds terrible." "Fine, I'll agree to the divorce." My mother-in-law and husband reluctantly agreed, probably worried about a lawsuit. They didn't say anything. I received $10,000 from my father-in-law as a settlement and alimony, and my husband and I divorced. My 2-year marriage came to an end. My parents complained that the divorce settlement was too cheap and insulting, but I was just happy to be rid of that family. 5 years have passed since then. It took a long time for my battered heart and body to recover. Waking up from nightmares, panicking from unpleasant flashbacks. I couldn't have recovered so quickly without my parents' support. Moreover, I somehow ended up owning my own shop, a new start in life. Thanks, Mom and Dad. I never thought I could open a shop. "What are you talking about? It's all your talent," my mom replied, but it was thanks to my parents. Right after I returned home. Worried about my emaciated state, my parents bought various baked goods like cakes and cookies from different bakeries. I've always loved sweets since I was a kid. I went to culinary school and even have a cooking license. Before I met my ex-husband, I had dreams of owning my own shop. If you hadn't bought those baked goods that time, I wouldn't have thought of it. One of the treats my father brought home was a cereal bar. A cereal bar is also known as a granola bar. It's made by compressing cereals like oatmeal with nuts like walnuts and almonds and dried fruits. They seem to be popular these days. They're delicious, but a bit hard to eat, my mom noted when we ate them together. That single comment from her changed my fate. Then, I'll make some that are easier to eat. I always felt like a burden, so it was a small way to show my gratitude. The bite-sized cereal bars I made then were a big hit with my parents. I made them with just the right hardness, and they looked and tasted great with plenty of dried fruits and nuts. They were indeed pretty, and I was confident that they would sell. Why don't you post them on social media or something? Social media is an online communication service. Anyone can easily post photos and send messages with ease. Aren't you doing something on it, Alice? So, I posted a photo on the social media account I had registered long ago. And it got a huge response. Where are you selling these? They're so pretty. Bite-sized and easy to eat with one hand. Many positive comments poured in. I was so happy that I cried while reading each one. After the emotional abuse from my in-laws and husband, I was made to believe I was worthless, and though my parents recognized me, I thought it was just because they were family. Somewhere deep down, I believed I was truly worthless. But I was wrong. Even strangers acknowledged what I created. It was my in-laws and husband who were odd. Worrying about such people was a waste of time. I was able to completely let go of them. With my parents' encouragement, I decided to focus on the bite-sized cereal bars and open a candy shop. I made sure everything was photogenic, sparkling, pretty, and something stylish women would want, actively sharing information online. It was a big hit. Since the initial photo was well received, I got interviews from newspapers and magazines, and articles were posted online. And surprisingly, I also got a new boyfriend. He's a lawyer. I visited a lawyer, the son of one of my father's acquaintances, for the shop's contract and opening procedures, and that's how our relationship started. He fell in love with me at first sight, seeing how hard I was working. I thought I was done with love, but he was a nice young man, completely different from my ex-husband. My parents also approved, saying, "We can trust Alice with this young man." Just when I thought I was reclaiming my life and starting anew, I received an unexpected email from my ex-husband saying, "I'll come to pick you up on Saturday." I replied, "I have no intention of meeting you again," and blocked his contact, but I showed the email to my parents and boyfriend. I had no idea why my ex-husband would contact me after all this time. My boyfriend said, "He probably won't come, but just in case, I'll stay with you." Both my parents and boyfriend decided to be with me on Saturday. On Saturday. Not only my ex-husband but also his parents showed up at my house, even though I said I wouldn't meet him. They tried to enter the house without permission, so I blocked them from coming in past the entryway. I asked, "What do you want?" Then my ex-husband said, "Alice, you must have calmed down by now. I forgive you, so come back to me." What? What are you talking about? I was truly baffled. My boyfriend and parents were equally perplexed. Yet, my ex-mother-in-law added to her son's outrageous statement, "Wouldn't it be better for your reputation to go back to him instead of being a divorcee? Our son is willing to marry you again." Furthermore, my ex-father-in-law said, "Alice, our son is apologizing so much. Stop being stubborn. His grandmother needs care, and we should discuss the future." I laughed, "No way. I'm engaged now. I have no intention of going back." And who's apologizing? Does what he just said count as an apology? Also, caregiving is the responsibility of the actual children, isn't it? My ex-husband seemed to only register the fact that I was engaged. Engaged? What do you mean? "You cheated on me," he yelled. I instinctively flinched, but my boyfriend stepped in to protect me. "Who is this guy?" "He's my fiancé." "Nice to meet you. I've been listening to your novel way of apologizing. It sounds more like you want her back as a housemaid." My boyfriend remarked sarcastically, causing me and my parents to chuckle. "What? You're getting cocky just because I'm being humble." My ex-husband got angry, probably because it hit a nerve. I used to be scared and comply with him in the past. But not anymore. I firmly said, "Who's being unreasonable here? I won't be controlled by you anymore." My father then said, "You should understand now. Our daughter has no intention of ever dealing with you again. We've completely cut ties. Now leave." Despite being told by my father to leave, my ex-husband and his parents were reluctant to move. Just as I thought we were getting nowhere, I noticed the neighbors had started to gather. They were drawn to the argument happening at our front door. They must have come out to see what was going on. I decided to use this to my advantage. I see the neighbors are gathering. If you cause any more trouble, I'll call the police. With so many witnesses, it's clear who's in the wrong. With that, they had no choice but to leave. I successfully repelled them. It's insane that he wanted to marry me again in the first place. Later, I found out why they showed up after 5 years. They didn't know that my boyfriend worked at the law firm where my ex-husband went to consult about bankruptcy. It wasn't that my boyfriend broke any confidentiality. My ex-husband happened to run into me when I was delivering lunch and blurted out, "Why are you here? It's your fault I have to file for bankruptcy." I then remembered that neither my ex-husband nor my former father-in-law had respectable jobs, and despite being into gambling, they lived lavishly. They had squandered their grandfather's inheritance and grandmother's pension. The inheritance was gone, and with the grandmother needing care and moving into a nursing home, her pension would be used to pay for the facility. Unlike before, they no longer had disposable income, but couldn't lower their standard of living. They quickly fell into debt trying to cover it with gambling. Apparently, they saw my success in the news online and thought to take advantage of me by showing up. I heard through the grapevine that despite being in the middle of bankruptcy proceedings, my ex-husband couldn't stop gambling, and his bankruptcy was not approved. He's still being chased by debt collectors and is on the run. What goes around comes around. As for me, I feel truly relieved, having finally put the past behind me with my own words. My business is thriving. My boyfriend and I are getting married soon. This time, I'm sure it's going to be the best life ever. I caught my husband Mark cheating. I think it's rare for someone to actually witness that. Most people probably confront their spouses after finding evidence of cheating on their phones. But I saw it with my own eyes. And I never imagined it would be in such a place, witnessed by so many people. Well, I had my suspicions about their relationship, but never thought I'd catch my husband in the act there. My name is Susan. I am a housewife with a 6-year-old son. The day I witnessed the cheating, Mark had the day off, and we were planning to go out as a family. However, when I woke up, he had already left the house. There was an email on my phone from Mark, saying, "My sister has a 103-degree fever, so I'm going to take care of her. Seems like there's no one at her place today. I'll be back by evening." I let out a big sigh. I had told our son Hayden that we were going to the amusement park today, and he was really looking forward to it since yesterday. Mark recently was in charge of a big project, and he said he hadn't been able to take any breaks for the past 6 months. So, this time off was a rare chance for some family time. But he went off to take care of his sister instead. She's engaged, so her fiancé should be taking care of her. Mark has always been overly attached to his sister. He started dating me because he said I was beautiful like his sister, and I remember feeling unsettled by that reason. Well, I met Mark's sister once, and she was indeed beautiful and kind. So, I guess saying I resemble her was Mark's way of complimenting me. But still, it made me feel uncomfortable. Mark used to say, "I want both a son and a daughter," and was very keen on intimacy. But since Hayden was born, the frequency drastically decreased. Now, it's practically non-existent. We're still young, and since Mark liked intimacy, I suspected he might be seeking it with another woman. Well, I might be able to forgive him for betraying me. It's infuriating, though. But what really bothers me is how he disappears early in the morning even on his days off, like today. He could at least spend some time with Hayden on these days off. Hayden adores his dad and cries when he realizes Mark isn't around. Mark seems too indifferent towards our child. He doesn't even buy birthday gifts, and he never attends school events, no matter how free he is. Sometimes when he comes home early, he just locks himself in his room and binges on video games. He hardly ever sees our son. Our son Hayden, who used to be a daddy's boy, might soon start seeing him as some stranger. Oh, and about Mark being busy with a big project, that was a lie. I was suspicious because he was hardly ever home, so I asked a former classmate who works at the same company, "Is Mark really that busy?" My classmate said, "No way, Mark's just a sidelined employee with nothing to do, always looking free. He leaves work on time every day, too." He told me this, laughing. I thought to myself, I knew it. After all, for someone supposedly in charge of a big project, his salary was still around $2,000, and he never looked tired from overtime. In fact, he seemed rather well rested. This also fueled my suspicions about his cheating. Despite all my frustrations, I finished preparing breakfast. I checked the time and wondered. It was odd. Usually, even without being woken up, Hayden would be up by 7 a.m., but it was well past that time. We would miss the daycare bus if I didn't hurry, so I went to wake him up. In his room, Hayden was still asleep. When I tried to wake him up saying, "It's morning. Time to get up," instead of a response, I heard a pained moan. Worried, I reached out to my son's distressed face and placed my hand on his forehead. It was burning hot. I called his name and gently shook his shoulder. He opened his eyes slightly and said, "Mom, it hurts." I almost panicked. At that time, there was an outbreak of an illness in the daycare, and I feared Hayden might have caught it. I had heard that it could be fatal, and I seriously thought my son might not make it. In desperation, I called Mark, but he didn't answer the phone at all. I didn't have the luxury to wait for a reply, so I called my mom for first aid advice. She's a nurse, so I thought it best to ask a professional. Then, under her mother's precise instructions, I quickly prepared an ice pillow and took Hayden's temperature. It was over 103 degrees. I called an ambulance and kept him hydrated while waiting for it to arrive. Mom said it might be heat stroke. Since I couldn't accompany him in the ambulance due to infection concerns, I called a taxi to follow to the hospital. During the ride, I kept calling Mark, though I knew it was futile. As expected, no response. So, I texted him. I hoped he'd show some responsibility if he noticed it while out. I waited in the hospital corridor, praying, while Hayden received emergency treatment. I remembered how my father had been taken to the ER but never came back. As I imagined the worst for Hayden, my mom, who had arrived to support us, reassured me. "Everything will be okay," she kept saying. And then, an hour later, Hayden was somehow saved. But he needed to be hospitalized for a week, so he was taken to his room. In the end, Mark didn't come home that day. The next day, I went home to get Hayden's clothes and brought some fruit for him at the hospital. When I passed by the emergency room to say thank you to the doctor who took care of him yesterday, I suddenly felt a flurry of activity in the area. Thinking someone must have been brought in, I decided not to disturb and postponed greeting the doctor. As I was about to go to Hayden's room, I saw a man and a woman on a stretcher. They were covered only with a thin towel blanket, appearing to be naked. It seemed like they were stuck together. Probably a case where the man couldn't withdraw during the act. I've never experienced it, but it must be tough. Embarrassing, too, to be brought in like that. As I was passing by, I inadvertently made eye contact with the man. Normally, it would be an awkward situation, but not for me. I froze. Because that man was Mark. "What are you doing here?" I exclaimed in surprise. "It's just that my sister caught a cold and it spread to me, so..." Mark stammered. At that moment, I was also confused. Hayden had just been brought in the day before, and now Mark too? What were the odds? Why was Mark brought in naked? And who was the woman with him? All these thoughts were swirling in my head. Then, my eyes met those of the woman entangled with Mark. Even in my confusion, it was clear. This woman was Mark's mistress. I glared at her fiercely, then recognized her familiar face. "Why is Susan here?" she exclaimed. That's when it hit me. Yes, that woman was Mark's sister, Miranda. The moment felt like an eternity. I had suspected Mark of lying about taking care of his sister to meet another woman. But I never expected this. To come to visit Hayden while still joined with a woman. And that woman being his own sister. This was beyond a joke. Since they were being carried away on a stretcher, I had to suppress my urge to confront them and could only wait for their treatment. Anyway, they couldn't escape, so I decided to confront them later. With this in mind, feeling sick to my stomach, I went to visit Hayden, my original purpose. Trying to compose myself, I spent some time in Hayden's room. When I checked my phone, I saw a bunch of texts from Mark. As expected, they were all attempts to gloss over the incident. He didn't mention Hayden's hospitalization at all. I decided to keep ignoring him and waited another hour. Then the doctor who took care of Hayden yesterday appeared. He smiled at me and said, "Your son is doing remarkably well. He might be discharged earlier than expected." His fever had gone down, and his condition had stabilized. It turned out to be a combination of a cold and heat stroke. "You gave him lots of water, right?" "That was exactly the right thing to do." "You're a smart mom, he's lucky to have you," he even complimented me. "It was more thanks to my mother, really. I should treat her some fancy meal as a present." After thanking the kind doctor, I knew I was about to face a huge ordeal. I was relieved about Hayden, but my anger was boiling inside. "Mommy, you look scary." I had frightened Hayden. I quickly put on a smile and told him, "I'll be back soon," before stepping outside to call Mark, who had left over 100 missed calls. Mark answered and immediately started with, "It's not what you think." There was a reason for. He got it all wrong. Shouldn't he be worried about Hayden first? Well, a man who was busy with his own sister while his son was suffering would hardly care about him. Such a husband made me worry about Hayden's future. I couldn't see Mark changing, so I decided to divorce him. Life might be harder, but I can manage for Hayden's sake. I told Mark, "You were busy with that while Hayden was suffering, right? You've probably always done it whenever you had a chance, even with your own sister." "That's truly disgusting." Mark was speechless. I continued, "By the way, I've already reported this to your parents. I won't tell your workplace. I need you to be able to pay alimony and child support. So, goodbye." 3 days later. Hayden recovered quicker than expected, so after completing the discharge procedures, we finally headed home, just my beloved son and me. Of course, Mark was not there. After the whole fiasco, Mark did come to apologize directly, but I told him I already hired a lawyer for a divorce. Mark pleaded, "This was my first time. Forgive me just this once. You're the only one for me." But I coldly told him, "Still lying at this point? I know everything already. Your sister confessed it all." Yes, I had anticipated that Mark wouldn't easily agree to the divorce. So, I had first approached Mark's sister, the other party involved, for negotiations. "I hear you're getting married soon." "Congratulations." "Thank you." I was thinking of sending a congratulatory message, but I have an even better idea. Want to know what it is? You're not going to talk about this, are you? Yes. Everyone should know what kind of person you are. Just mentioning this will make it crystal clear. I smiled slyly. "Please don't. My life would be over if you did that." Pretending to consider, I continued with a smile. "Well, I guess I can keep quiet about this. In return, why don't you tell me in detail how many times you and Mark did it? That way, I'll stay silent." "Of course, your brother might feel betrayed, but what will you do?" She immediately confessed, "I'll tell you everything, just please don't tell him." When I told this to Mark, he fainted from the shock of being betrayed by his sister. After waking up, Mark agreed to divorce and left the house dejectedly. I then proceeded through a lawyer to demand a divorce, custody of our son, and both alimony and child support from Mark. Mark tried to argue about the amount, but I whispered in his ear, "Shall I spread the word at your company?" He quickly agreed, "I'll pay the amount you asked," and left the law office. Later, somehow his company found out about the incident, and he was severely reprimanded. A month later, he lost his job and now works at a food factory, placing strawberries on cakes. Somehow, even there, everyone knows about his deeds, and he is often the subject of young women's gossip, feeling quite isolated. As for Mark's sister, despite me keeping quiet, her fiancé broke off their engagement after the whole thing was revealed. Apparently, her fiancé, suspecting infidelity, had hired a private investigation. She was demanded a large sum as compensation for the broken engagement and now works at a strip club. Recently, her ex-fiancé gave me photos of them in the act, saying I should use them if needed. I wondered what kind of nerve he had to give such a thing to a woman like me. However, I decided to keep it stored in my dresser. If Mark contacts me or does anything, I'll gratefully use it as a precaution. I've moved back to my parents' house for a fresh start and am raising Hayden with their support. Since my parents lived far away and couldn't see their grandson often, they were happy to help as much as they wanted. I try not to rely on them too much, though. Hayden, who once had a high fever, has been healthy for 3 years now, and is continuously awarded for his great performance at school. He seems to have completely forgotten about his biological father and enjoys every day. This is the most pleasing thing for me. Oh, that reminds me, our family has grown. It's the white cat, Snowball, sleeping comfortably on my lap. Before moving, I said goodbye to Snowball, who often visited our garden. As usual, it climbed onto my lap and then didn't move at all. I was sad to part with Snowball, so I ended up bringing it to my parents' house. Snowball is now close with my parents and is as important to me as Hayden is to them. I look forward to watching Hayden grow up with my parents and Snowball by my side. Sitting on the porch, stroking Snowball, that's what I think about. Oblivious people don't realize their own insensitivity. It's quite common to see people who are unaware of others' kindness. But what about a malice? Some people in the world just let sarcasm and a spitefulness slide, thinking that's just how things are. I was surprised when someone pointed this out to me later. It was exactly what I was like. My name is Jessica. My husband, Brian, and I, who work at the same company, just got married at the end of last month. Jessica. The beginning is crucial in marriage. My married friends all mentioned. I never thought I would encounter mother-in-law problems. That's what I thought. But the seeds of conflict were also present at my husband's family home. About 2 weeks after we got married, the summer break arrived. Brian wanted to skip visiting his family this year due to our busy wedding preparations. I persuaded him by saying it's an annual event, and managed to get 1 day for the visit. Judging from their interactions so far, it seemed his mother adored Brian, so she would surely be delighted. Following my friend's advice, the beginning is crucial for the relationship with my mother-in-law. During the summer visit, I planned to showcase myself as a thoughtful daughter-in-law. I titled it, The Thoughtful Daughter-in-Law Plan, and it was set into motion. On the day of the visit, we arrived at my in-laws' house in the afternoon. When we rang the doorbell, "Welcome back, Brian," greeted us with a big smile from my mother-in-law. "Been well?" my father-in-law asked with a grin, appearing shortly after. Actually, I'm not too comfortable around my father-in-law. Sometimes our eyes meet, and I feel like I'm being observed. He seems kind, though. I looked away and watched my mother-in-law, who was happily chatting with Brian. I was thinking how much more pleasant it is to watch someone with an expressive face like hers, when suddenly our eyes met and she gave me a clearly displeased look. That made sense. I had been staring rudely. Sorry. I was just lost in thought. I apologized. If you're tired, you didn't have to come back with him, she retorted. Huh? But Jessica came for. Brian started to say something, but at the same time, my father-in-law called him over with a Brian, and Brian went to him with a sigh. Now, it was just the mother-in-law and me. A chance for recovery. Jonah. Is there anything I can help with? At first, my mother-in-law seemed grumpy, but then she had a sudden idea and asked, could you go shopping for something we're running out of? She wanted herb-infused seasoning. You might not know this, but Brian really likes it. There's a shopping center about 30 minutes from here. Her expression was now cheerful, quite a change from earlier. Understood. I'll go and get it. I replied, readily accepting the task. In fact, I also love the same seasoning. It's not widely popular, so it's not always easy to find, and I had trouble locating it in the same chain of shopping centers before. Worried it might be sold out, I checked nearby import stores and called to confirm they had it in stock. I found a store about 15 minutes away by car and promptly headed out. Returning home in less than an hour, I saw my mother-in-law preparing tea in the kitchen. Oh, you're back early. Did you not find what you were looking for? Don't say you couldn't buy it because it wasn't available. Do you think that would be acceptable? Of course, it's unacceptable to return empty-handed. What? She was visibly surprised as our eyes met. "You actually found it?" she asked, shocked, so I explained. "I went to a different store. It's only a 15-minute drive from here. They carry a wide range of products from the same manufacturer. You should definitely check it out. That should be a thoughtful daughter-in-law." I thought I must have impressed her, but she looked like she had just eaten something bitter. Jonah? Did I do something wrong? I just remembered something else we need. This time, we really have to go to the shopping center." I understood the situation, noticing her expression, while my mother-in-law began writing a shopping list. Then my husband, Brian, appeared and said, "Oh, Jessica, you're back? Going out again? To the shopping center? I'll come too." "Leave the heavy lifting to me," he said. "Brian, I was just preparing tea. Jessica's not a child, she can go alone, can't you? If there's time for tea, why don't you go? Don't make Jessica do it." I insisted Jessica should go. It seemed the mother-in-law had been looking forward to tea time with her son. "Why don't you have tea with Mom?" "I'm fine," I suggested to Brian. But she quickly refused. "No, just do what you want." "Let's go then." Finally, some alone time. It's like a date. It's a shopping trip, I thought to myself, amused by Brian's cheeky grin. When we returned from shopping, it was already time for dinner. "Brian, your favorite sushi tonight," mother-in-law announced cheerfully, having dropped her earlier grumpiness. She must be a straightforward and loving person. I ordered from our usual place. Deluxe sushi, just for the family. With a lacquered black sushi container on the table, my father-in-law was already seated, smiling cheerfully. We were invited to sit down, so we took our seats. Brian peeked inside the sushi container and said, "Hey, Mom. One of these is different." True to my husband's observation, one of the sushi containers had different toppings. Egg, shrimp, tuna. It was the standard assortment. "Oh, that," my mother-in-law stopped making soup and began arranging the sushi containers. According to her, the sushi restaurant made a mistake in the order. I was surprised by her casual acceptance. "Did you ask for a refund?" "A refund? Well, it's our regular place, so." "Even if it's a regular place, they should correct their mistake. It's none of your business." "I'll deal with it later," she concluded loudly. A bit irritated, she placed the standard assortment in front of me. Puzzled by this, my husband said, "Hey, why does Jessica get the standard one? Just call the restaurant and have them exchange it." Although he spoke the plain truth, I do prefer the standard assortment because of my simple taste. "Jonah, please don't worry about it. It's unfortunate about the restaurant's mistake, but I actually prefer this one." "Really? Yeah, I remember you always eating mostly desserts at sushi places." "Well, if Jessica's fine with it, I won't say anything." My father-in-law was already munching on his sushi, completely unbothered. I was amazed at his carefree attitude. Despite the restaurant's mistake causing a scene, once the meal was over, my mother-in-law clapped her hands and said, "Let's have dessert. Brian's favorite, cheesecake. I prepared just enough for the family. It's also my favorite." She opened the box and began placing slices on plates. But it seemed there were only 3 pieces for Brian, my father-in-law, and herself. "No piece for me? Hey, where's Jessica's piece?" "That's because I prepared only for the family." "What do you mean?" "Flattering and pretending to like something. There's a limit to being cunning. Sending you to chase for a non-existent item and you still act all composed, even recommending the store to me. Jessica's like this naturally. It's not flattery. She's seriously like this." A rapid-fire argument ensued between mother and son, which I couldn't keep up with. Meanwhile, I noticed my father-in-law smirking at them. Reminds me of the old days. My late mother used to torment my wife from the beginning of our marriage. "Only for the family, so the daughter-in-law gets nothing," she'd say. His comment seemed meant only for me. "What do you mean?" "Jessica reminds me of my wife. Always accepting everything positively, always smiling. Back then, she was quiet and always ended up crying when scolded. So, I'm similar to mother-in-law? At least I'm not crying. In our family, a daughter-in-law isn't considered part of the family. She's more like a convenient housekeeper. My wife is just repeating what she experienced in the past with you. His whispered confession and smiling face made me feel nauseous. Ahaha. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. The room went silent, and all eyes turned to me. Now I understand this family. Since I'm not considered part of it, I'll file for divorce. The carefree old man was the actual cunning one. What? Came the shocked responses, followed by Brian sighing heavily. Jessica, please don't divorce me. I'll just cut ties with my mother, okay? What? Cut ties with the mother-in-law? Not the father-in-law? What do you mean, Brian? You'd abandon your own mother for this woman? A woman who's nothing but a flatterer, a nasty person. I raised you with care, and you choose her over me. Shocked by her words, I stood there stunned. No matter how positively I tried to hear it, it was criticism against me. The words from my mother-in-law felt less like a loving mother's concern for her son and more like a woman's scorn for infidelity, which sent chills down my spine. My husband, Brian, unfazed, directed a cold gaze at his mother. That's the problem. What? Mom, you don't truly care about me. You're just pushing your feelings onto me. If you really cared about me, you wouldn't treat Jessica, my chosen wife, with such deceit and declare her not part of the family. His words made me recall everything that had happened at my in-laws' house. The deluxe sushi and the cake my mother-in-law ordered, just enough for the family. I had assumed it was a coincidence or a mistake by the restaurant, but it was all her spite. She wanted to show me I wasn't part of the family. Brian, unaware of his father's deceit, must have thought I was suggesting divorce because of his mother's mistreatment. My mother-in-law, who had suffered similar treatment in the past, now doing the same to me, and my father-in-law, who had enjoyed watching and not intervening. What a perfectly matched couple. The more I had wanted to get along, the stronger my sense of betrayal and anger. Brian, don't say that. I just wanted Jessica to be prepared as our daughter-in-law to understand the discipline of our house. It's disgraceful for a husband to defend his wife like this. So, a husband should stay silent when his wife faces unjust treatment? Just become a coward? I was bullied by Grandma too. Treated as less than family. But Dad never said anything. I never got defended, so why does she get kindness from you? My mother-in-law, in her extreme agitation, slammed her anger down on the table. Brian, startled, looked at his father. Mom, you were bullied by Grandma? His father feigned ignorance under Brian's gaze. My mother-in-law's face turned pale. So you did this to Jessica despite your past? Do you lack a human heart? Poor Jessica, sorry, my wife was wrong. My father-in-law's gaze at me screamed, stay silent. He wanted to make his wife the sole villain, to avoid his son's dislike. Huh? Don't joke with me, you terrible old man. I glared at him sharply, and he was taken aback. Quiet and calm daughter-in-law suddenly speaking out was, of course, surprising for him. So, a daughter-in-law is just a housekeeper, right? You whispered that to me, didn't you? Always crying when scolded by your mother, I heard. And you knew all along, yet acted so innocent. What? You deceitful daughter-in-law. You tricked us all along. Why should I not be allowed to enjoy watching those bullying? Blurting out in anger, he looked around in shock, but it was too late. I won't stay silent about such things. I can't endure. I laughed at him, and my mother-in-law turned to me. You understand my feelings, right? You have a kind husband, but I didn't. I had no choice. She tried to justify her treatment of me. No, I don't understand at all. If you feel remorse, why not apologize first? You weren't forced by anyone, were you? A person who willingly does bad things they experience to others, even if the world forgives them, I never will. I responded sternly, then turned to Brian. Cutting ties should be with both parents, not just your mother. Brian sighed deeply and nodded, of course. After that, Brian cut ties with his parents. We changed our contact information immediately, but my mother-in-law, thinking an apology would fix everything, came to our house several times. My father-in-law, due to the past I revealed, was in a sort of domestic separation. He loved Brian too but blamed me, saying, "It's your fault for everything." Apparently my mother-in-law kept digging up the past, arguing with him, "It's your fault for not defending me," and they constantly fought. They tried to appeal to us, but I coldly turned them away, warning, "Next time, I'll call the police." We moved a few months later, so I don't know what happened afterward. My mother-in-law, abandoned by her son, lost her spirit and declared she would stop taking care of my father-in-law, likely leaving the house in chaos. This incident made me realize my own insensitivity. I don't know if I can improve, but I'll try to live more attentively. My name is Julie. I've been married to my husband, Tom, for 15 years. It's been a whirlwind of busy, stress-filled days. It was all because of my selfish mother-in-law, my opportunistic sister-in-law, and my incompetent husband who doesn't care for the family. It all started when my father-in-law, John, opened his CPTA office at his own house. My mother-in-law, Karen, noticing my background, forced us to live with them, saying, "Your bookkeeping skills are just what we need. If you're going to be at home anyway, you can also do the housework, right?" That's what she said, dumping not just the office assistant work on me, but also the daily cleaning and cooking. Whenever she's free, she's out shopping or dining, just enjoying herself. She plays favorites, and her favorite was my sister-in-law, Samantha. She was my brother-in-law's wife. Samantha and her husband have kids and live about an hour away from us. They come to our place every weekend. They usually contact Karen beforehand, and she would say, "Leave the kids' care to me." Hearing what Karen said, Samantha just rides on her coattails, saying, "Then I'll come over tomorrow," without considering our plans at all. Following Karen's words, "Make yourself at home," Samantha dumps her kids on me and does nothing herself. We have a daughter, but they have 3 boys. The amount of food they eat is a nightmare. When I ask for help with preparing meals, Samantha turns sour, saying, "You're really going to make me work on my day off?" When I persist, saying, "I have other work besides household chores, so I'm short on time," Karen butts in. "Are you belittling Samantha for being a housewife? Let her relax while she's visiting. You're being mean." That's right, being a housewife is really hard. "Mother, you're so considerate and kind." Samantha smiled at Karen and took her arm. Every time I remember her smug look as she left, I seethe with anger. Just when the stress was so intense, and felt like I was going to have a rash, my husband, Tom, had made it worse. When I complained about Karen and Samantha's terrible behavior, he said, "Isn't housework your job? You manage it alone even when you're busy. So, why do you want help? You're just trying to pass it off on someone else. Why do I have to take care of their family too? If that's the wife's job, then do it. If you don't like it that being the way, we can have a divorce. But do you think you can manage a divorce with no significant qualifications?" He smirked, as if to say, "You couldn't possibly manage, could you?" Tom, whom I thought I married for love, became quite cold towards me after our honeymoon phase. He probably didn't like the fact that I prioritized my work over him, and that his father, John, had high expectations of me. Jealous jerk. I screamed inside, but stayed silent. He ended our conversation saying, "I'm busy studying for my exams." He seems to be wanting to inherit the CPTA firm, but keeps failing the exams. "You don't have any significant qualifications either," I wanted to scream at him. But in these tough times to get a job, it's scary to leave the household with just my bookkeeping skills. It's not the perfect timing yet, I told myself. The only neutral person in this household was John. He showed no interest in home affairs and let Karen rule, but as a professional in work, he was respectable. Unlike Karen and Tom, who dumped everything on me, he carefully taught me the job and even suggested I become a CPTA. I realized that having a goal made it easier to overcome hardships. The future goal John gave me became my anchor. I studied hard in my spare time, passing one CPTA exam after another. I'll never forget the joy when I had finally passed them all. With my practical experience, I was registered as a CPTA and became a true member supporting my father-in-law's office. Tom didn't like the fact that I started working as a CPTA and became overtly cold. I tried to be nice, saying good job to him while he was studying. But he snapped back, "Are you looking down on me? You really are an uncharming woman." He also demeaned me, bringing up his brother and Samantha. "He's lucky for having a beautiful wife like Samantha. Why did I marry someone like you? We only have one daughter. Even my mom says you're the worst." Karen still favored Samantha, pampering her kids more than our daughter. Samantha, getting too confident, even left her kids with us to go on a trip with her husband. My dear Samantha is such a good girl. She even brings us souvenirs, considering we can't travel. Compared to her, you're always grumpy and acting all high and mighty now that you're a CPTA. Really, you're such an unpleasant daughter-in-law. I've become accustomed to how sarcastic Karen was, and wondered what I should do. I had divorce papers prepared, because I thought I would leave my husband once I became a CPTA, but now I'm unsure about the timing. I had thought that once I got the CPTA license I could leave anytime, but I enjoyed working with John, which made it hard to leave. But what finally pushed me to make my choice was Karen's hospitalization. It happened right before summer vacation. She fell down the stairs and broke a bone. While she was in hospital, she suddenly said to me, "Samantha and her family will be coming, so make sure you take good care of them." What? They're coming even when she's not here? How brazen can they be? I was stunned, but I knew complaining to Karen was pointless. So, when I got home, I called Samantha. She was cheerful on the phone, saying, "Thanks for being able to look after the kids again this summer." But when I told her I couldn't because Karen was hospitalized, she responded, "What? I've already made plans for vacation with my husband and it's too late to cancel now. Don't you understand? Are you that stupid?" Her attitude changed drastically and mocked me. I snapped back at her, "That's my line. Every year, you don't think about others and just do as you want. I have work and I'm busy. But still, you want to leave your kids with us while you go on a long vacation with your husband? Don't be ridiculous. You're not allowed to come." Samantha was silent for a moment after my retort. Then she said, "What's with that attitude? Mom hates you anyway. I'm telling on you," and hung up. As expected, she immediately tattled to Karen, and now Tom. Tom called me in, saying, "I heard you told Samantha not to come to our house. You are really the worst. You've really disappointed me this time. A heartless woman like you deserves a divorce." Who's the worst here? Just then something in me snapped. Wait, I had been waiting for this day, a chance to make my choice. Fine. I agree on getting a divorce. I calmly started to fill in the divorce papers I had prepared. "What are you doing?" Surprised by my readiness, he was speechless. "I'm going to send them to court. What else do you think?" Shaken back to reality by my words, he rushed out of the room. While leaving the room, Tom shouted at me, "Even if you beg and cry, I won't take back what I said." After that I went to see John. I explained everything to him, and he said, "I'm sorry for all the stuff you've been through." I never felt resentment towards him, even though he had never defended me. "All I can do is wish you well on your new journey." Perhaps John felt guilty towards me. Since Tom refused to discuss anything about the divorce, John helped me with child support and property settlement. And finally, by the time things had settled down, 6 months had passed. I was busy opening my own private office when I received a message from Tom that said John had been hospitalized. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. When I rushed to the hospital, Tom, Karen, my former brother-in-law, and his wife Samantha were there. Seeing me, Karen said with a smile, "Oh, Julie, it's good to see you well. With John like this and the office to worry about, don't stay mad forever. Come back to us." Tom, trying to sound sweet, said, "I'll forgive you if you apologize. So, come back home." "No thank you. I'm just here to visit today." Unable to hold back, Samantha burst out. "They're asking you kindly, and you're still so cold. Let's not rely on someone like Julie, especially now that the office is in danger." "Samantha!" Karen and Tom exclaimed, turning pale. But I had already guessed their motives. "Stop it. It's shameful. You've realized her worth too late. John said quietly, having watched the disgraceful scene in silence. But without Dad, what will happen to the office? How will we live? Tom lamented. You're being pathetic, a man over 40 whining like that. It's your responsibility now. Julie is no longer family to us. But that divorce doesn't count. Julie needs the office too. Who else would hire a woman like you? Tom ranted, still out of touch with reality. John sighed heavily. Julie has made it on her own. She has many clients who rely on her. She's a fully qualified CPTA, unlike you, who still hasn't passed half the exams. Tom was at a loss for words at that comment. It seemed like John was aware of his own condition, or perhaps to celebrate my new beginning, had explained the situation to the clients I handled and arranged work for me. Thanks to his support, I was able to start on preparing my own office. Really, Tom is such a hopeless child. Karen remarked, sensing that her son was at a disadvantage. Then she pulled at my sleeve, saying, "Hey, Julie, I think we can be close again. I've been having trouble with my leg since the injury. I need rehabilitation, and it's hard to manage things at home with this leg. Please come back. Why don't you ask Samantha for help with rehabilitation?" When I coldly dismissed the idea, Samantha snapped back on behalf of Karen. "I'm busy with housework, I don't have time for that." Karen was shocked by Samantha's immediate refusal. "Samantha? I'm not going to take care of an old person. I hate that kind of thing." John burst out laughing at her frank aversion. "You've been spoiled by my wife all this time, and yet you dare to say Julie is cold-hearted. I don't even want to see your face, please leave." Samantha's face turned pale, and John then turned to his wife. "You're such a fool, keeping such a daughter-in-law around, and losing a capable and reliable one like Julie. Why don't you apologize and ask this useless daughter-in-law to take care of you?" John's biting words left his wife speechless. As I stood there in shock, John said, "When you realize your time is limited, you find the courage to speak your mind." He chuckled at his own words. After that day, I continued to visit John in the hospital. Tom eventually had to close the office. He seemed to be struggling to find a job at his age. Karen's leg got worse. She having limited outings and not being able to do the housework, she forced Tom to do it all. Tom being incapable of managing, their home was a mess. They must be having a hard time. Samantha hasn't been near the family's house since that day in the hospital. My brother-in-law seems to have run out of patience with his wife who rejected his mother, and the warmth in their home has apparently cooled completely. My wife was complaining the other day about you being a cold daughter-in-law. John chuckled, as if he was stunned. I couldn't be there for his last moments, but I was able to express my gratitude to him. What I can do for him is to maintain the relationships he had built. I'm determined to do my best.